Morning, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, hello. Happy sunny spring morning if you're in the West Michigan area. Holy cow, what a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Hello, welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning. Hello.
Good morning. Hello, hello.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for the chat note.
I love all these doorbells. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Jill. Hi, Jill.
I love this. Morning, Gretchen.
Good morning. I'm here.
Love it. Love it.
I'm just in a baseball cap, so you can't see me.
No judgment. This is just a chill morning conversation. So come as you are. Refill your coffee, your tea, your water, whatever you're drinking this morning. Come hang out. All righty. Well, I'm sure we'll have some more folks trickling in on this beautiful morning. Maybe they took a little extra time on their commute because of this beautiful weather. But first and foremost, I want to welcome everybody to this month's Collaborative Cafe. So for those of you that may be new, that maybe this is your first time attending or you're not super familiar with HR Collaborative, just wanted to, give you a little information about our organization. So HR Collaborative is a community of fractional HR experts who help small to mid-sized organizations make work better by providing HR talent and solutions when and where they need it. So in this cafe, we're going to be talking about compensation and culture to establish a positive and productive work environment. A little bit about how we're going to tackle that today. Of course, I'll provide introductions to our hosts. We'll then dive into their discussion on compensation and culture. We'll have a breakout session where we'll talk about some of the challenges we're faced as an organization. After that, we'll regroup to report out. We'll then have some more feedback from our hosts, some conversation again, break out into the same groups that we were in the first breakout session to discuss another topic. Usually we talk about solutions or ways we can implement some of what we've heard at our own organizations. We'll regroup once again to have a report out, and we always save some time at the end. So without further ado, let's pop over to meet our hosts. So Jane Newton is the Associate VP, leads the Creative Dining People and Culture team to deliver strategies aligned to the company's mission and strategic vision, to be the most trustworthy, flexible, and attentive hospitality partner. She cultivates a work environment where each team member can thrive and be valued for their unique gifts. Tara, who's spoken at our cafes before, has dedicated her 20-year career to working with business leaders to evaluate their people strategy and operations. As Director of Client Services here at HR Collaborative, Tara oversees and leads all of HR Collaborative's recruiting, compensation, employee engagement, leadership and team development, and consulting services. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to our host today.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and welcome, Jane.
Thank
We are so
you.
excited to have you today.
Excited to be here.
Thank you. And Jane, just for those of you who may not know, Jane has been a client of ours for a
few years.
Yes, I was going to say a few years now, and we've had the pleasure of working with her and her team and with Creative Dining, and thought it would be so great to have you today to talk a little bit about all the great work that you've been doing at Creative Dining. So why don't we just jump right in, and why don't you tell tell all of us a little bit about Creative Dining.
Yeah, so Creative Dining is a boutique hospitality management company. We serve colleges and universities, senior living communities, and also some camps and conference centers, and also corporate dining and manufacturing. And as you think about dining services and catering, for example, back in the 80s, unless you were doing dining services yourself, you would have to work with some of the larger companies, for example. And I think we all have been in a situation where we have felt like a number or a small fish in a big pond. And so our two co-founders founded the company in 1990 with an intent to help our clients feel like the top 10. For example. And so since then, we have been able to grow to 14 states now and across with 70 plus locations. And we are based in Zeeland, Michigan, where we have a small corporate team, for example, that is supporting our 1,600 plus employees.
Wow. So you guys have grown quite a bit
Yes.
in the past
Yes.
30 years. That's amazing. So you mentioned that you have founders.
Yeah.
You are a founder-run organization, which I know a lot of folks on this call are as well. So these are folks who started the company and continue to be part of the company. And so can you tell us about, from being a founder organization, what prompted the company to start HR? Because I think that is something that a lot of companies, small companies, struggle with at first.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, a founder is wearing pretty much all the hats when you start. And I think it was probably 20 plus years in where the co-founders and their administrative team could no longer support effectively the growing population of locations. And at that point, they, I think this was in 2014, actually created an HR function and hired the first HR leader. And fast forward, I have been with the organization since 2019, and that was 9 months before the pandemic started. And then, and we all know how that is. We actually, before that, did transition to an outside of the company CEO. So our founders have successfully transitioned from being founders to board members to really supporting the organization in a lesser capacity. And then the outside CEO has been able to lead us since 2015 when he started.
That's great. And so it sounds like there's been quite an evolution.
Yes.
Sounds like it was one of those HR off the side of your desk kind of thing, which I know a lot of our callers or all of the folks on here today have experienced in one way or another when you're in an entrepreneurial situation or in a founding situation. And then you grow and grow and grow. And then we need some help. And then it's so great that you were able to join in 2019 and start to take that evolution even further and help with people practices. So why don't we go ahead and jump over to, let's talk a little about compensation. So, compensation, you and I were chatting this morning too, and we were kind of laughing a little bit because we're not comp experts. You and I are not comp experts. But compensation is a really important part of a organization and of course, and of retention and all of that. And you have a specialty and your expertise is in driving and developing culture and people. And that's something that I love to do as well. And so even though I don't think folks necessarily think a lot about compensation as part of culture, it really can be. But let's first talk about challenges. And let's talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced at Creative Dining as it relates to compensation.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I joined right before the pandemic started, and we know the acceleration that created with creating the labor challenges that we saw at that point and also today. And specifically within hospitality, we saw that there were individuals who were just burned out and left the industry altogether, which further, accelerate the challenges that we are facing. So, you have people quitting sometimes without notice. And we even saw this with managers, for example, getting to that point. And with the accessibility to information, which employees have always had, you go online and you research what you should be paid and feel like you're underpaid, and not recognizing other factors such as geography or role or span of control and autonomy and all the things that go into determining pay for a position, for example. So you're in this space where you're either burned out or, looking and seeing what's out there. And we also have, for example, job postings that anyone can look up and see what competitors are paying, for example, and even with pay transparency, for example, in Colorado, with the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, we actually do have to include in all job postings what that pay is.
Sure.
So you have pay that you're raising to attract talent, and then you have current employees that are seeing those rates, and you have wage compression that's happening. And so how do you address all that?
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that particular state with Colorado. There are actually a handful of states now that have pay transparency acts, and in March of this year, Congress it presented a bill called the HR Pay Transparency, and that is expected, it's a federal law that is very potentially expected to pass this year. And so I think, in Michigan in particular, which many of these folks that are on the Zoom chat today, there is a feeling that that's New York, that's Colorado, that's California. So we don't have to worry about that. But in all actuality, with the Democratic government in Michigan, as well as in the federal government, it is very likely that pay transparency will become something that will be part of what we do from an HR perspective. And you've already had to work through that as a company that does focus on other states outside of Michigan that have these laws. So it's really very, very interesting. And you had mentioned staffing challenges as well with the pandemic, and we're still seeing that transitioning over. And we have seen during the pandemic something that was pretty prevalent, and I think people are still working through it today, is a lot of reactionary compensation to try to retain and attract talent during that time. And so now, and you mentioned it too, there's compression issues, there's things like that. You also said about the staff wanting to go out on the internet and look everywhere and say, this is what I should get paid because this is what this particular website said, or this is what my friend said. And they have access to everything now.
And not realizing that some of the information that you find out there is employee sourced, for example. So you self-report, right, what you make, and which in comparison to compensation surveys that employers report what their wages are.
Sure. Yeah. And then the final thing that we have here on the slide is program agility. And this is something that you and I have talked about too. And it's, something that I've seen working at HR Collaborative is that what can occur, one of the challenges with compensation programs in companies, but also other programs outside of compensation, like rewards programs or even recruiting programs, is the lack of agility. So having to figure out, how do you create a program that can be agile and move based on the needs of the organization, and also culturally based on, as cultures shift, as you change philosophies, how are you able to be agile? So we're going to go ahead and turn it back over to Lisa. And I know we just talked a lot about challenges, I promise you. After you guys talk about some challenges in your breakout groups, we're going to jump in and start talking about some solutions.
Wonderful. Thanks, ladies. And one thing that just popped in my mind when you were talking about pay transparency laws, it may go in effect at a federal level, but with so many employers having remote talent these days, that the pay transparency laws just if you're not headquartered in those states or jurisdictions that have pay transparency, but you may hire someone who lives or resides or works from those locations, that law does apply to you. So for those of you saying, oh, that's not Michigan, it doesn't apply to me. Well, if you could potentially hire talent in one of those jurisdictions that it does apply, it, surprise, it does apply to you. So it can get very sticky. So you want to err on the side of caution, right? So that's one of the challenges you guys are facing.
Looks like you guys had some really great conversations about some of your challenges.
Go ahead. I'll just dive into some of the things that stood out as I was looking through the notes from the breakout sections. I noted in a couple of different slides that there's always that concern that the organization doesn't have the financial resources to invest or increase everyone's pay, and then how to decide, which, if you don't have those resources, which groups to kind of split those funds between. Balancing internal equity with market demand. I know that Jane and Tara talked about that a little bit, but that internal equity versus, what is our team pay compared to each other versus the market in general. I also saw, which is really interesting, that some organizations, when they had really good years, they'd pay really big bonuses when they were profitable. But with an economic downturn or with the pandemic, it's made the organization unable to be so robust or pay any bonuses at all in some cases. So base pay has, as a result, gotten behind because they've had their total pay has increased by those big, healthy bonuses. So this speaks really well to an organization's compensation philosophy. What makes up that total pay, and maybe time to take a look at that. Some said they're unsure how to design that bonus program. They don't want people to expect a bonus every year, so they're not sure if they want to make it a discretionary bonus or a formulaic, having some sort of they don't want to set an expectation for a certain amount every year, and just in case it, for business reasons, it can't happen. Retention incentives. So some organizations are wondering how to design retention incentive plans across the organization. How do you make it as rewarding for positions where you may progress or develop out of quicker than others? Employees, just in general, they're expecting more frequent compensation reviews and increases. So they want to know, they're going to ask for those conversations more and more. There was also a mention of, nonprofit versus for-profit competitiveness. There's some talent that could be easily spread, amongst numerous industries. And there's a disparity between the ability to pay in a nonprofit versus for-profit industry. Managers, they're not able to have honest conversations. I think that also speaks to their comfort level or knowledge in compensation conversations and how those numbers are established. Total rewards. How can employees impact their total rewards or really maximize the rewards available to them? Again, speaking to that education piece, they want to know how they can impact their total pay to really maximize what the organization offers to them. And then, of course, like Jane and Tara mentioned earlier, the job postings that include pay or transparency. A lot of candidates have that expectation now that number is going to be provided to them. And sometimes they won't even apply to a job that doesn't have a salary range posted because they don't want to start that conversation if they don't think it's worth, if it's not in the ballpark. So those are the ones that rose to the surface. I invite the table or the breakout hosts. Are there any themes that rose to the surface that I didn't capture here that we want to make sure that the rest of the room is aware of?
Sure, I can add from our group. A common theme that we saw was around the strategic communication around total rewards and communication, and the need to be able to upskill some of our managers and leaders who, may not be skilled in having those conversations. and not having the budget per se to expand salaries, but how to make that value proposition really well known by leveraging the other perks and benefits that an organization can offer.
Love it. Yeah, great. All great things.
Our group also talked about kind of digging into a little deeper, not having the financial resources to increase everyone's pay, but also the cost of supply chain costs and, increasing costs everywhere, not just income and kind of like cost of living, but also on the operation side of a business. We're seeing increases in everything.
Yeah, inflation impacts us as a business as well as individual consumers, right? That's a great point, Caitlin. Yeah, or supply chain, both the cost and the time of delivery too. Sometimes it's, we're kind of at the mercy of our vendors as well. All right, anything else from the groups?
I have one more thing that we were really talking about, the trying to find talent in a very competitive market, and how to, when you're doing transparency pay, how can you quickly capture talent besides just talking about the pay, but how do you interject all the other awesomeness about the company? So thinking about how can you quickly do that in a short amount of time. So being creative.
Sure. That's great, Debbie. Well, I think we have some insight on how to do that. So that's a really great segue into, compensation is just one piece of the pie, right? Like, an organization has so many things to offer, including their culture. So I'd like to pass it back over to Jane and Tara to talk about, the culture of an organization and how that can be highlighted and as part of the process. So take it over, ladies.
Thanks. I love the conversations that you guys have.
I was nodding my head as you were doing the recap because there were a lot of the same questions and challenges that we had and continue to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I love this topic, and we talked about this too. It's just such an interesting topic to me because you don't always think about compensation and culture going hand in hand. I mean, compensation is, this is going to sound silly, but like a necessary evil for a business to do. And so how can you take your compensation program and really embed it into and have it really represent your culture? And something that we had talked about, and I know you didn't remember saying it, but you said something really, really great that I would love to just start off with, and then we'll jump right into the culture at Creative Dining. But you had mentioned when we were talking that the approach to compensation for any company is really the very first thing that potential employees see or candidates see from your company, and how you spend your money defines monetarily what's important to your company. Not just compensation in terms of how you pay your people, but how you spend your limited resources really does define culturally what your values are as an organization. And so I found that very fascinating. So something I wanted to share with the team because it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. So why don't we jump right in? Why don't you tell us a little bit about Creative Dining's values and your culture?
Yeah, so I want to start by just sharing a story or an example of our values in action. So, I think we can all remember March 2020, and I feel like it was, I was sitting with our nutritionist, and they're saying how, it looks like it's not going to be more than the flu, for example. And then within a week, we had our colleges and universities shutting down, corporate dining and businesses shutting down. So all of a sudden, our people were sent home and didn't have any work. And except for our senior living communities that were essential workers and were still operating through this entire period, we didn't know how long this was going to last for our team members to be without work. And my heart wants to provide pay continuation for every single person, because this is, nothing of their doing, for example. But as many of you mentioned, as far as with financial resources, we don't and didn't have the financial resources to do that. And so our executive leadership team quickly rallied together and came up with a benefit planned relief fund. And so all of our team members who were laid off during that time due to the pandemic, we covered their insurance premiums for them. So that way they had health insurance coverage continuation, and that was one less thing they had to worry about during this time.
I love that you guys did that.
Yeah.
So tell me, how does that decision, walk us through how that aligns with your guys' values and culture?
Yeah, so when we think about flexibility, we are I would say not a cookie cutter type of organization, and that's really how we're founded, is how are we flexible and creative with our clients, and also how do we do that internally? And so we are a very flat organization. I report to the CEO, and our leadership team and our small corporate office is literally just right all together. And so now virtually, just jumping together and with not having too much bureaucracy, we can make a decision and be able to put it into place, and everyone rallies together. And so I think that's just a great example of our creativity, flexibility, but then also, family being one of our values as well, with sensitivity. And then sustainability is in regard to sustainability of our organization. So for example, we do need to make fiscally responsible and sensitive decisions, and that includes with pay. And so that's where some of that exists.
Great. Why don't we go ahead and jump forward to the next slide? And let's talk a little bit about what traditionally people call total rewards. You guys have a different term for it, and I love it.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit with us about your total well-being,
Yes.
and reward.
Yeah. So as we look at total well-being and rewards, thinking about what do we as humans need to be at our best and operate at our best, and recognizing that you have this work-life blend, and that impacts both work and life, and the challenges that you face in either space. And so as a company, how do you look at this holistically and look at what is that package of support, for example, to support your employees? And depending on the industry, you have pay, PTO, health insurance benefits, for example, and essentially those are permission to play pieces, where if you don't have those, or if you're not competitive in those, then it's going to be a hard time attracting talent. But as you expand beyond that, what do your people need? And also, what are their experiences? So for example, you may offer health insurance, but if accessing quality medical care, or it's too cumbersome to work through your process, for example, then the benefit is not doing as much as you want it to, for example, to be able to help support the total well-being. And then also, what are some of those roadblocks that people may run into as you apply a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens? What are the needs of different populations within your organization? So for us, when we think about some barriers to employment and continued employment, we have barriers for transportation and people that need transportation. And so at a location, is it by a bus line, and you can provide some bus passes as part of your employment package, for example, to help reduce that barrier.
I love that. So I know you guys have 70 plus locations in, would you say, 14 different states? So why don't you talk to us a little bit about equity and how you use your limited finances from an equity perspective? So for example, I think from traditional compensation is about equal. So what you see, some traditional compensation philosophies and programs are maybe more about everybody gets a 2% raise, or every department's going to get this amount of money or this percentage of money towards, with the limited resources we have, towards raises. You guys have done things a little bit differently, and I so appreciate how you guys have utilized your limited budget. It really has been more about equity and about making sure that folks are paid based on their region.
Mhm.
And I know that's something that you worked with Lisa Brown on
Yes.
when we first started working with you on comp, so.
Yeah,
just
so
share a
I,
little
so I
bit.
definitely have enough practitioner experience with comp to be dangerous, but I am not a comp professional, and so
Yeah.
was very thankful and grateful when we were able to connect with Lisa and Tara about helping us with our compensation system. And part of this is recognizing we do have 70+ locations across 14 states, and with the speed at which operations needs to extend offers to retain people, for example, it makes it cumbersome to do a market analysis, for example, for each of those occasions that come up. And so when we talk about prioritizing resources, started with our corporate office and put together a compensation philosophy and also a pay structure based on, and once we did that, looked at what can we do now to get people to where they need to go. So pay equity being one of the priorities, addressing that first, and then to get to a certain part of the range based on years of experience and objective factors, for example, what is that next move? And with one of the breakouts, sums being about strategic communication. So walked our entire corporate office through this process that we went through with a credible third party, for example, to design the comp philosophy and program and educated them on what goes into, for example, placement within a pay range. And the next step is now to do that with the rest of our locations. And so to start with market analysis, recognizing we don't want to have 70 different pay structures or more, depending on where we go. So worked closely with Lisa to look at geographic differentials and then create, I think we have 4 right now, pay structures that we can assign different locations through. So that way it's more indicative of where are you recruiting for talent, for example, that you're going to be paying that market rate for.
Yeah, I really love that. So it's looking at the critical roles, those critical openings that you need to fill, taking the limited finances that you have and really putting effort into those spaces. And then focusing too, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I know that's been something you've really focused on as an organization too, and making sure people have what they need to be able to have a living wage and be able to support themselves. That doesn't always mean that everybody's going to get a 2% increase across the board. It might mean that geographically or critically based on a role, that these roles might receive more for those types of reasons.
Yeah, and we did communicate to our team that this is what we can do next, for example, and recognizing that this isn't the only change that's going to happen. And in our compensation philosophy, we say that we do want to encourage individuals to have conversations with their managers. So going back to the comment about equipping managers on how to talk about this, but also to know the why. So it holds us accountable to explaining the why behind every pay decision, whether that's HR or manager, for example, and yeah, making sure that people can engage in that transparent conversation.
Yeah, I love that because that is actually, you actually have transparency in your comp philosophy. I know that doesn't work for everybody, but for you guys, that was something that you really, it might be aspirational for many and it might be aspirational for you still, but it's still something that is important to really try to strive towards. So I appreciate that. So I know we need to turn you guys over to have some great conversations too, but and I won't hold you for too much longer, but I would love to have a conversation, just a brief conversation, Jane, about, you know, what this 2022 McKinsey and Company study mentioned were the top reasons why employees stay. Theirs was actually why employees leave too. But these are the top reasons employees stay. And I really wanted to highlight this. This is, you guys will be getting these slides as well. So you'll have these to be able to reference to. But something that when we first started working with you guys, you guys and you continue to have a focus, a culture of learning and development. And so advancement opportunities, I found that is the number one reason people stay. So can we talk a little bit about what you guys have been doing to really work on, you know, outside of compensation, how to really keep people, retain people in your organization?
And so when we look at total wellness and rewards, we do look at professional development and industry certifications as part of that program, for example, or that benefit, and recognizing that with our culture vision, we want people to grow professionally and personally. And so even if that means that you find a better opportunity someplace else, we want to celebrate that and at least be able to equip you with these transferable skills, because we don't want to hold you back from something that is going to be better for you, better for your family, better for your community, for example. And so, you know, that's been our approach for learning and growth. And right now working on career paths, for example, and what does that look like within culinary, but also other areas in the organization. And with inspiring leaders, I do want to mention that, you know, we have a big focus on equipping our frontline leaders, who we know the direct supervisors have the most critical role with engagement and retention, for example. And so how do we invest in their leadership development to be able to have these honest conversations, to be able to create a safe workplace to learn, which is part of our culture, and not only from a physical standpoint, but also psychological and emotional. And I actually just attended this workplace mental health Action Summit from the Health Action Council, and they talked about the psychological employment contract that is an unwritten set of rules and standards and terms and expectations that we carry in our heads. And it's of what we expect. And these will change from generation to generation. And one of the examples they gave was with Gen Z, who are ages 26 and younger currently, tend to have a value-based contract. And so do the employer's values align with their personal values? How do they achieve work-life harmony and receive feedback and career opportunities, for example? So as employers, we need to learn what those are for our different populations. And for us, it's part of our inclusion and belonging journey.
I love that. And I think, it all ties back to our limited resources, where we want to put those limited resources towards. And going back to what we mentioned right at the beginning of this is that, what you put your money towards is telling a story to your candidates and to your employees. And so making sure that you've got a very clear philosophy from I'm going to say total rewards, but systemic rewards perspective, from a total wellness perspective, from a compensation perspective, and then even your mission and your values, and making sure that they're all aligning and flowing towards that exact same thing, so that there's not any contradiction there.
And we kind of had to breeze through, I think, the culture vision, but that is something that I do share in interviews, for example, to help people understand that we do have a focus on culture, and this is what that means. And this is essentially the holistic employment experience that we want to have.
Yeah, I love that. I think are we overtime or so sorry, we cut into your guys' time, but this is such a great conversation, Jane. And thank you so much for sharing all the great work you guys are doing. And I'd love to turn it back over to Lisa so that you guys can start having some of these conversations. And we're hoping we're sparking some ideas of what you can do in your areas.
Sure. Well, I agree. We could talk about this all day long, right? Right, ladies? So we are going to give you guys some time to talk in your groups again. So we'd like you to share your thoughts in this breakout session. Think about what ideas you have or other things you've seen that have been successful in getting your company culture and compensation or other elements of your total rewards offerings to align. Think about what you can do now to move your culture and compensation in the right direction. And of course, build on each other's thoughts and feedback to think about what you can bring back to your organization to start working on later today if you have the time. So hold on to your seats.
Welcome back.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Looks like we still have some people trickling in, but I'm just going to cover some of the breakout themes I saw. Of course, I couldn't capture it all because you guys had some great conversation, but some of the things that kind of rose to the surface or that I noticed were talked about in several of the groups was that culture vision and obviously the consistency and communication, alignment of teams and accountability, especially leaders walking the talk. So just living those values. One thing that's really important is building those expectations early on. So employees know, what's important to the organization and can make a mutual decision if it's a great fit or not. Again, we'll share this list so you guys will see all of these things, building your employment brand, involving senior leaders in interviews and onboarding to really get them ingrained. I loved the comment about benchmarking more than just compensation because we're talking about a whole package, a whole bundle of rewards, not just base pay. It's so much more than that. Training and development. I really thought I was going to see more of this, but I wanted to remind everyone that training and development we saw on that slide was the top reason employees stay at an organization. So focusing on those programs. There were a few comments about using resources wisely. So leveraging fractional experts. So, having an accountant that you go to, you don't need one on staff. You could leverage a fractional accountant, safety advisor, human resources professional, training and development leader. So leveraging those. So, you get the biggest bang for your buck, really. And then one that a lot of groups were talking about, which I really, really like to see is what creative rewards make up your total package. So there were some things, again, there's a lot more out there that we'll share when we send out the summary slides, but things like flexible schedules, free or discounted parking if you're in an area where you have to pay, floating holidays or, personal days to, for mental health days, stipends, EAP, financial and legal resources. And I really like that I saw in several groups that emphasis on promoting that psychological contract that Jane had mentioned, as well as the promotion of, mental health and well-being in the workplace. And I know Jane has, a personal experience from creative dining that she'd love to share with the group on how they emphasize that at their organization.
Yeah, so I actually did hit burnout in 2021, where I ended up taking 30 days off work. And I include my personal story as part of our new manager's orientation. And part of this is to recognize that the signs of burnout, that it can happen to anyone, and also the importance of normalizing discussions about mental health in the workplace. And so again, we include that at the beginning along with our culture vision to really set that stage. And then with that, we did enhance our EAP, or employee assistance program, and have a resolution-based EAP that's for employees and their households, whether they're on our benefits or not, recognizing that if it's not you personally as an employee, you could have a partner or child or parent that, that you're helping to care for and that maybe having these needs as well. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, like I said, there were so many wonderful things that bubbled up. I couldn't capture all the themes, but we'll get a comprehensive list together before we share out the highlight slides. Quick before, I know we're getting close to time here, but from table leaders, are there any themes that you think we need to share with the group before we get close to wrapping things up?
I'll jump in real quick because it piggybacks right off your recent comments about the EAP. Several folks in our group said we've got these great EAPs. They're a lower cost investment, but there's very little usage in their organizations. And they question whether or not maybe it's just because, hey, if I call in, is that really confidential? But we want to encourage EAP use. So if anybody has any ways that they found success in letting people know that it's confidential or assuring them that it is, but getting engagement and using these great resources, you're feel free to share it now, or I'd love a phone call or an email so that I can pass that information on and hopefully build up these EAP usages.
I don't know if Laura is able to share really quickly, but Laura from Natural Choice Foods had a phenomenal idea. Laura, can you share that with us? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, you're fine. We did just this past benefits year, we started monthly benefits communications that go out. And then for the people that don't have company emails, we do post those monthly. But what we found a big use out of is that our EAP sent us business cards. And we put those all around, and we find they fly now. People will take that instead of going and looking at a poster. We saw it over 3 times uptick of our EAP since we've been doing those things.
Great.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. That was going to be my recommendation, Jamie. It's like, just communicate it more. It's like people need to hear things, 7 times before it's retained. So the more you communicate it, the more that they're aware of what's available, the more likely they are to utilize it. So great. That is so awesome. Well, we're getting close on time, and I definitely don't want to, miss, sharing any other important information. So again, we'll share this list and the other topics that bubble to the surface in our highlights video. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Of
Hey,
course.
Lisa,
Yeah.
just one final thought from Jane, real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just on the promoting EAP testimonials. I say, when I introduce it, I call it 2 a.m. For example, I've utilized the services, and I encourage leaders to utilize the services themselves so that way they can recommend it as well. And so we've seen an increase in supervisor and peer referred call-ins.
That's great. I love that, Jane. That's perfect. I mean, how better to speak to the importance of a program than to experience it yourself? I love it. Wonderful. Well, as we start to button things up, I'm sure some of you have noticed these awesome HR Collaborative mugs that some of us are sipping our coffee and tea out of this morning. We'd like to introduce to our cafe members that we are beginning a collaborative mug club. So to qualify, you need to, of course, sign up for and attend the cafes. So make sure that you subscribe to our newsletter to get those additional details on how to become a Mug Club member. So if you have your phone handy, go ahead and scan that QR code to get signed up for our newsletters. If you're already subscribed, you'll find details in the next newsletter. Talking about competitive compensation, benchmarks, and plans. We talked a bit about compensation, how it impacts culture, but of course, we want to be able to help any organizations that may be looking into that. So if you're interested in learning more about how HR Collaborative approaches benchmarks and compensation planning, you can pull out your phone and scan that QR code. It'll take you right to our webpage where we talk about our approaches, our approach and offerings when it comes to competitive comp and benchmarks. And then last but not least, if you haven't liked or follow us on LinkedIn, please follow HR Collaborative on LinkedIn. Of course, you'll get an email that comes to your inbox for attending today that will give you a link directly to it. But make sure you like and follow us on LinkedIn to get updates on not only the highlights from today's Collaborative Cafe, but also information on ones in the future. A huge thank you to everyone who's participated, our hosts, Jane, for coming in and being an extended member of our HR community and sharing your wisdom and best practices with our community here. As a reminder, our next cafe will be in July, so be sure to keep an eye on your email or LinkedIn to find out the topic, date, and time. For those of you that have to get on with your day, thanks again for joining us, and have a fantastic rest of your week.